Look, over the last 7+ years, we have been working collaboratively and together to revitalize the American rural economy. And we all remember what things were like in the rural economy and, in fact, the entire U.S. economy in 2009. We were in the midst of the Great Recession. We saw high unemployment. We saw poverty increase. And we were dealing with a large number of American families who were food insecure. Over the last 7+ years, we have worked together to build a new rural economy, one that essentially has 4 major components. First and foremost, production agriculture and exports. An incredibly important aspect of what we do is to make sure that the American brand of agriculture is promoted throughout the world. And I'll talk about trade in just a moment. That has obviously been an incredible component of this revitalized rural economy. But it now has a complement with the local and regional food systems that you all have helped to promote in your respective states. A chance for young folks, a chance for folks who start small, to be able not necessarily to compete in a commodity-based market where they have little control over the price they receive for what they grow and raise, but in a local or regional market where they deal directly with their customer and consumer. And we now have 162,000 producers engaged in that effort. We've seen that industry rise from a $5 billion industry over the course of the last 7 years to a $12 billion industry today, and it is projected in the next couple of years to grow to 19 to 20 billion, helping to create jobs as well. So local and regional food systems complementing production agriculture and exports. We've also seen a remarkable increase in activity surrounding conservation, and not just conservation for the sake of better natural resources, for more nutritious and profitable and prosperous and productive land. Not just for water quality and maintaining, in some parts of the country, scarce water resources, but conservation as well as, in essence, a commodity in and of itself, creating opportunities through ecosystem markets for the investment from the outside, from regulated industries and nonprofits that are interested in promoting conservation, now working in partnership with us and with our farmers and ranchers. We saw, I think, a remarkable partnership not long ago in the area of the sage grouse, where we encouraged others to join with USDA to work with producers in the western part of the United States to avoid the listing of the sage grouse. We've invested over $400 million of USDA resources, committed another $300 in the future. We're seeing a substantial amount of interest by the private sector in making sure that we work our way through this process. We've worked collaboratively with the Department of Interior to create regulatory certainty and predictability so that someone who does conservation practices that will preserve that habitat and preserve the sage grouse will now have 30 years of a degree of certainty that they won't be faced with additional burdens if at any point in time the sage grouse is listed. The great work that was done avoided a listing. So, ecosystem markets, local and regional food systems, production agriculture and exports. And last but certainly not least is bringing manufacturing back to rural areas through the bio-based economy. Not just the production of ethanol, as important as that is, and not just expanding the opportunities for ethanol and blended fuels to be used not just in cars and trucks, but now in planes and in ships, working with the Department of Defense, working with the commercial aviation industry to expand substantially the opportunities for biofuels. But we now recognize the significance of biochemicals and biomaterials and bioplastics. It is now a $364 billion industry. It helps to employ 4 million Americans. And I think we are just on the cutting edge of the introduction of a new American economy based in part on plant-based economics. So there's tremendous opportunity here. And as a result of all of that work, we have seen the unemployment rate in rural areas come down dramatically. We have seen the poverty rate come down at an accelerated rate. And we just announced not long ago that food insecurity among America's children, particularly in rural areas, has reached a record low. So there is some good news to celebrate, notwithstanding the fact that we're dealing with some tough pricing for some of our commodities. That's why it's important for us to talk about trade. And I want to talk to you extensively about what we have done together and what we have done at USDA to make sure that we promote a trade agenda. First of all, I think it's important to note the role that exports play in American agriculture generally. 30% of all sales, 30% of all agricultural sales are directly related to exports, and 20% of ag income is related to exports. So it's critically important that we look for opportunities to expand. We've done a number of things. We have promoted trade. We have worked hard with our Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, our Foreign Agricultural Service, to reduce barriers that exist in countries to our products that are not based on science, that are not consistent with international rules and regulations. During the course of this administration, over 2,000 sanitary and phytosanitary issues or barriers have been removed that have allowed us to have a freer flow of our goods. We've worked hard to reopen markets. Just yesterday, we received some positive news, but we need to make sure that we're measured in our reaction to the notion that China is beginning to think about reopening the beef market. Candidly, it's long overdue. It certainly is justified by the science and by the work that we've done to improve our traceability system in this country. But what China announced yesterday is just the first of 3 steps that have to be taken in order for that market to be reopened to even a limited amount of our beef. And so we're going to continue to push ahead and ask them to aggressively push forward with the next 2 steps. We've looked now in the beef industry finally at equaling and exceeding the level of beef sales as they were prior to the BSE incident in 2003. It's taken us about 12 years, and the reopening of markets in Japan and Korea and around the world as a result of the work of this administration and previous administrations to get back to where we were in 2003. Obviously, opening up the Chinese market will allow us to go even further. We have promoted trade and the American brand of agriculture by participating in several hundred trade shows and trade missions. Michael Skuse has led a number of those. Phil Carsing is here today, has led a number of those. And we have had a great partner across the several hundred trade shows of the folks in this room. Many of you have been with us promoting and accessing those opportunities. We have looked for new market opportunities, markets that had been closed for a considerable period of time. And I think of Cuba in particular. There is a market that historically we have basically had a lot of business. It's roughly a $2 billion market today. Cuba imports 80% of their food. It's a market that, frankly, the United States should dominate just because of the proximity of Cuba to our shores. We have an opportunity to receive potentially $1 billion of additional business opportunity if we take a more enlightened view about our relationship with Cuba. The President traveled to Cuba, sat down with President Castro, has begun the process of opening up opportunities in Cuba, but we need Congress to remove the embargo. We need Congress to make it easier for us to remove the artificial barriers that currently exist to trade in agricultural products. But we are working at USDA for that day. We now have individuals who are in Cuba on a permanent or on a daily basis. Hopefully it will become permanent as part of our mission down there. And these folks are beginning to lay the groundwork for that day when the embargo is lifted so that we'll be able to have a full understanding of the market, the challenges that we may face from a sanitary and phytosanitary circumstance. And we're making sure that we approach this relationship as a two-way relationship, recognizing that there may be ways in which Cuba can help us meet some of our demand, particularly for organic product. We've also looked at free trade agreements to expand trading opportunities. The South Korean trade agreement, the one with Colombia and Panama. These are trade agreements, along with the organic equivalency agreements we've negotiated, have helped to increase economic trade in agricultural products. We're now faced with a significant opportunity, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I'll talk about that in just a second, after I point out the other step we've taken in order to promote trade, and that's trade enforcement. We recently announced the beginning of the consultation process on subsidies in China. Frankly, when China entered the WTO, it was fairly clear what they were required to do with reference to their subsidies, and it's also very clear to us that they have not paid attention to their international responsibilities. They have a de minimis level of subsidy that they can authorize and approve. We believe that they far exceeded that de minimis route, which is why we have started this enforcement process. This administration has had more trade enforcement actions than any previous administration. We have not lost one yet, and we don't expect and anticipate we will lose this one with China. This is potentially somewhere between a $700 and multi-billion-dollar opportunity that we have lost over the course of a number of years for American agriculture because of the subsidies that China has provided for their own producers. And if they want to be part of the international system, then they have to apply and comply with the international rules. That will open up the market not just for the United States, but also will have an impact on New Zealand and Argentina and other countries. So that brings me to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We have had over the last 7+ years the best years in agricultural exports in the history of the United States. We will top $1 trillion of agricultural sales during the last 7+ years. A lot of hard work on the part of the people in this room, and people in agriculture across the supply chain can celebrate that remarkable achievement. But we're now faced with a tremendous opportunity. A trade agreement that deals with 40% of the gross global domestic product in the world. 40% of all the economic activity occurs in the countries that are part of the TPP. 47% of our existing trade arrangements and relationships are contained within the countries in that agreement. The United States of America has always been willing to open up its markets to competition because we recognize that when we do, we spur innovation, we encourage more choice, we give consumers less costly goods. It's better for all of us. The rest of the world hasn't necessarily seen it that way. And TPP allows us the beginning of a process of reducing high barriers that exist in the countries that are part of that agreement that could have a significant and positive impact in expanding agricultural trade in those countries. Now, there have been a number of studies and a number of estimates as to what that impact would be, but the most conservative one is the one that was done by the Farm Bureau that suggested that we'll see roughly $5 billion of additional sales and $4 billion plus of additional agricultural income for farmers and producers. So this is a tremendous opportunity to have a multi-billion-dollar impact at a time when we would like to have more sales, like to have a reduction of worldwide surpluses of crops and commodities, like to have stronger prices, more sustainable prices, steadier prices. This agreement can provide that. So in and of itself, that is a reason, and perhaps the only reason we need to be in favor of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but there are other reasons. Another reason is the opportunity that it presents for the future. Asia has the fastest growing middle class of any continent in the world. It's projected that in the next 15 years in Asian countries, the middle class population, which today is roughly 530 million people, will grow by 2.7 billion to a total of 3.2 billion people. In the middle class, that's not the general population, that's middle class. That's 10 times the population of the United States. 10 times the population of the United States, and these are middle-class consumers that are interested in purchasing from America. They understand the quality, the quantity, and the price competitiveness. Why would we want to shut ourselves off of the opportunity to do business with 10 times the American population in just one continent? Makes no sense to me. And in addition, we know that if we're able to get this agreement through, we already know that there are a number of countries that were skeptical that it could be done, but once it was done, now realized that they had missed an opportunity and would love the chance to be part of this. And they would be part of a high standards agreement, an agreement that raises the bar, doesn't lower it, and that for the first time speaks directly about labor and environment. high standards, bringing the world to a higher standard, leveling the playing field, being more transparent, reducing barriers, opening up markets, expanding opportunity. That would be a reason enough to be for TPP. But there's another reason, which is that if we don't do this, it's not as if the world stops and everything stays the same and we continue to go along our merry way. With due respect to our visitors from New Zealand and Argentina, my guess is that if we can't get this done, then they will continue to pursue what they have done effectively, which is to participate in bilateral trade agreements, in one-off agreements that wouldn't necessarily include the United States of America, that wouldn't necessarily reduce the barriers to U.S. product, but would certainly result in the reduction of barriers to our competitors' products. Why would we want to give competitors that edge? That's another reason why we ought to be for TPP. And then there is the last reason, which is that there is an effort in Asia today for China to have an all-Asian trade agreement. I want you to stop and really reflect on what that means. Do you think an all-Chinese-led effort at an Asian agreement will result in more transparency or less? Do you think it will raise the bar in labor or lower it? Do you think it will encourage more sensitivity to environmental issues or not? Do you think it will include the United States or not? This is serious business, folks. This is a serious opportunity for the United States of America to continue to reflect what it does best, which is global leadership. And it's unfortunate today that the conversation in this country seems to be to look inward at a time when the world needs us to look outward. The people in this room, I know you know this. I know you know it because you've been saying the same things in your states. But we need to begin expanding the conversation. We need to begin in agriculture to not just simply talk to one another, which is a comfortable discussion. It's easy for us to go out and talk to the Farm Bureau, the National Farmers Union, the corn growers, the soybean folks, those who represent pork, cattle, poultry. It's easy. It's what we're supposed to do. We've done it for years. We need to be talking to the people that are more skeptical about all this. We need to expand the conversation about the importance of agriculture to this country. We need to make sure that every American, not just those who farm, not just those who ranch, not just those who own farmland, but every American understands what they get because of American agriculture. They get several incredibly important things. First, when they walk out of a grocery store, having filled their bags and put them in their car and drive back to their home and put them in their refrigerator, and put them on shelves, they have more money in their pocket as a percentage of their income than virtually anyone in the world. Most developed countries, people will spend 20 to 25% of their paychecks on food. Here in the United States, it's a little bit less than 10%. I ask every audience that I speak to beyond the farming audiences I talk to, and I talk to many different diverse audiences, I ask them to stop and think about their own paycheck. I ask them to think about how they allocate their money every month, and have them assume that 15% of their paycheck, which they are currently spending, would have to be redirected to food purchases. How would that impact their life? Would they still live in the same place, or would they not be able to afford the mortgage or rent? Would they be driving the same car? Would it be an older or later model? Would they be able to put money aside for their child's college expense, or put resources into their retirement account? How would their life be different? And most Americans would see a significant difference in the choices that they would have available to them. And then I simply ask the audience, have you ever stopped to thank a farmer for that flexibility? Then I say, there's something else that American farmers provide to you, and that's the opportunity to be what you want to be, to do what you want to do. In my case, in 1972, when I graduated from college, I made the decision to go to law school. I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't have to stop and think, now, before I do this, do I have to get an acre or two of ground? Do I have to learn how to plant fruits and vegetables? And do I have to get a dairy cow or hog so that I have food for my family? Never stopped to think about that at all. Knew full well that all I had to do was to get a paycheck and go to the grocery store. And I would be fed and my family would be fed. I had the freedom to think about anything I could do with my life. Do not take that for granted. Because in other countries, not everybody has that. In a lot of countries that don't have a functioning agricultural economy, not only do they not have expanded opportunity, they don't have any opportunity at all. They have high levels of unemployment. Not in this country. We're free to dream. We're free to think we can do anything. And then I ask those audiences, have you ever stopped to thank a farmer? Because you have a diverse, complex economy because we began with a functioning agricultural economy that allowed us over time to become more productive, freeing up the rest of us to pursue our dreams. When I was born in 1950, from that point to today, American producers have increased productivity by 170%. What's remarkable about that increased production is not just that number, but they've done it with 26% less land and 22 million fewer farmers. It's an incredible story of innovation that's allowed the United States economy to become more sophisticated and more layered. And then I say to the audiences, you know, we have the ability in this country to produce everything we need. Not necessarily everything we want, but everything we need to feed ourselves. We don't really have to rely on anybody else. Now, you know, we like to import from New Zealand, we like to import from Argentina, we like to import from other countries so that we have incredible choice and options and the wonderful things that are grown and raised there and the quality. But it isn't a necessity. Many countries, very large companies, powerful countries, don't have food security, don't have the capacity to say to their people, when all else fails, we can always feed you. That's why China relies on countries like the US and Argentina and New Zealand for their food. They are not capable of producing enough to feed their people. So we are a more secure nation. And have we ever asked and stopped to think about saying thanks to a farmer for that? And then finally, in addition to all of that, is the farm families and the rural families that represent 15% of America's population, that populate 35 to 40% of our America's military. The men and women in uniform, the people that put their life on the line every single day, go to faraway countries to defend not just our values and our liberties and our freedoms, but other people's. And have we ever stopped to think about the important role they play and where they came from, and thanking their mothers and fathers and grandmothers for instilling in them the value of service to country? So I think trade's pretty important. I think conservation is pretty important. I think building a local and regional food system option is important. And I think production agriculture is important. But I think we have a responsibility as leaders in this industry to speak more broadly, to speak more proudly, and with greater passion, so that the rest of the country understands what we understand. And if they did, I think it would be a lot easier to get trade agreements through our process, and it would certainly be a lot easier to get farm bills through our process. So let me take this opportunity, because it may be the last opportunity I have, to thank you for what you do, to challenge you to continue to do what you do, but to make sure that you broaden the message, because only 1% of America's population farms, and the other 99% probably generations removed. They need some reminders, and we're the people that have to provide it. God bless you all.